Hey,
Fantastic. Okay.
all right.
Way to go. Teamwork makes the
Ah,
dream work. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around. We're officially recording. We're live. We're on the line, ready to have a great time here with the team behind Aether Therapeutics. I'm not going to waste any more time here, so we're going to go ahead and dig right into it. I'm going to do a couple quick housekeeping items, and we're going to get straight to the programming. Again, thank you so much for joining. I'm Eric Cox. I'm a member of the Netcapital team. We're on the line with two folks from the Aether Therapeutics team, John and Wolfgang. We're going to talk about this investment opportunity, but a couple quick housekeeping items. As always, the company on the line here is actively raising capital on the Netcapital platform. They have raised a significant amount in order to be able to get into this forum. So we do appreciate the time that you're taking. Um, Quickly, please do use the Q&A feature built into Zoom. We want to keep this conversation as interactive as possible. I see some questions already came in. That's fantastic. We see there's a chat feature as well in Zoom, but please do use Q&A. That allows us to track as many questions as they come in and get to as many of them as possible. And this will be recorded, is being recorded. Thank you, John. So we will share that with folks if you do miss anything. But please do engage with the Q&A feature. This company is actively raising. I will share a link for that fundraise into the chat now, but please do use the Q&A to ask your questions. We're going to dig right in. John Harris on the line here. Why don't you come on in, tell me a little bit about your background, what you're building with Aether Therapeutics, and we'll get into the weeds about the team as well, because we won't let Wolfgang stay on the bench for too long. We definitely want to let him
Oh,
share his perspective as well.
well, definitely Wolfgang is the brains behind the organization. But, about a year ago, I was asked to give an address to the University of Utah's Master of Business Creation program. And the director of the program introduced me to the group as the CEO of the most important startup in America. And, again, that was off the cuff, it was unaided. But really, what we're doing is we're developing some compelling technology that was developed by Dr. Sadeh, and we think it'll translate into a real promising weapon in the arsenal to treat the worldwide opioid crisis. Now, Dr. Sadeh's discovery was that a compound called 6-beta naltrexol, now we refer to it internally as ATX1, is potent at low doses in preventing dependence and hyperalgesia. Now, hyperalgesia is a heightened sensitivity to pain, but it does that without affecting analgesia or causing withdrawal. Now, this compelling discovery creates a new paradigm in the treatment of opioid addiction and pain therapy. In short, we believe ATX1 acts as a retrograde addiction modulator. Now, to date, we've been funded by about $4 million in non-dilutive NIH grants with an additional $2 million of paid-in capital. Now, with continued development, ATX1 has the potential as a treatment for drug addiction and preventing drug addiction from ever taking roots in adults and neonates. For example, one of our founding members is a man named Rick Hawkins. His stepdaughter, about 15 years ago, was a competitive cheerleader, and she sustained a pretty significant injury that required subsequent surgeries and unfortunately became addicted to opioid pain medication. So when Rick, who is and I'll get into Rick's background, later in the presentation, but when he saw the technology that Dr. Sadeh has been developing, he really was like, yeah, this is such an important thing that we need to do and to get this into the clinic and into patients as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much for that background, John. And Wolfgang, if I could let you in for a quick moment, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so excited to be a member of the Aether Therapeutics team?
okay. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Ether Therapeutics. I'm also still active as Emeritus Professor at The Ohio State University, as well as the University of California in San Francisco. So I've been involved in research for many, many years. I have I have over 400 publications. And one of my focuses was always on opioid research. So, as John had already mentioned, we have identified 6-beta naltrexol, or I'm now calling it ATX1, as a compound with high potency in reversing dependence and also hyperalgesia, and possibly also reducing drug craving. That's an ongoing study supported by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So why is this so unusual? Well, 6-beta-naltrexone, or ATX1, is already known as a compound, as an opioid antagonist that works at the target. This is the mu opioid receptor, but it has very low potency. And we have identified a novel mechanism, which when the opioid receptor is being stimulated by opioid analgesics over a prolonged time period, it becomes sort of self-sufficient. It doesn't need the opioid anymore. It just signals by itself without any ligand in there. So it's active, and that is driving dependence. So what we then found is that ATX binds with very high potency to this type of receptor, of the receptor that drives dependence, and it sticks around at the receptor in vivo in animal models for a long time. And it does something unusual, which is novel for any drug discovery program. It reverts or reverses the dependent state of the receptor to the normal state of the receptor, which would be then reversing the dependence. And that's why we have this mechanism of action that is way below that of normal opioid analgesic, which would cause, at the same time, would cause withdrawal or block analgesia. So we can give our compound, get rid of maybe addiction or main elements of addiction, while allowing opioid pain therapy to occur or helping to wean people from opioids. And that also includes, actually, we have a very nice model on guinea pigs. It includes our prevention of neonatal abstinence syndrome.
Now is the natal application. And for those who don't appreciate how large of a problem this is, and this might be for you, Wolfgang, or for you, John, can you talk about the problem of opioid addiction? I know we've, there was a real moment of public consciousness during the, like maybe 3 to 4 years ago, but that this is an ongoing issue. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of the big problem that is opioid addiction, not just here in the United States, but globally?
Right. Yeah. So, first and foremost, part of my background, I have some expertise in marketing. And so we did a deep dive into really trying to scope out, the U.S. market. And just to give you a couple of examples, there are over 120 patients or 120,000 people in the United States every year that die from an overdose of opioid, whether it's illicit or prescription drugs. I mean, it's just a terrible, intractable problem. Additionally, there are about 4 million patients per year that go into a drug rehabilitation program in the U.S. alone. And we estimate that there's probably about 30,000 babies that are born with opioid withdrawal. It's kind of a coarse term, but they're sometimes referred to as drug babies. And the long-term effects on these, babies as they're born, they go into the neonatal intensive care unit. It's really a struggle for them as they suffer from withdrawal right when they're born. And so the magnitude of the market is absolutely immense. And, we, have looked at those 3 markets. And so our primary market is really in treating drug addiction. You can give ATX1 by itself to a patient, and it begins to reverse the opioid dependence for that patient, and it doesn't cause any withdrawal in and of itself. And that market in and of itself, in the U.S. only, we estimate to be about a $5.5 billion annual market. Now, the neonatal application is smaller, but it has such long-term effects. If you can really, help these babies when they're born to not suffer from withdrawal, we also think that there's long-term developmental challenges that can be avoided as a result of that. And then, as Wolfgang mentioned, one of the other, I think, unique aspects of our compound, ATX1, is that you could actually co-formulate it with an opioid, and you could create a non-addictive pain therapeutic. And opioids are tremendous at pain remediation, but the adverse effects are such a challenge. And so we think, between those three markets, we're talking U.S. alone of about a $13 billion market. And then you would, extrapolate that into international markets, and it's a massive problem and certainly a massive societal need that we believe our compound ATX1 can address.
And normally I'd have a couple more questions, but at risk of, folks have been hanging on the line. I appreciate you being patient here. So I'm gonna go straight to a couple of these questions coming from the community. And again, this is what we're here for. Please ask the questions, the Q&A. I appreciate you all. So I'm gonna dig right in. How will ATX1 be administered? Can it be taken orally, by shot, IV? Let's talk a little bit about the deployment of the therapeutic.
Maybe I can address that question. Fortunately, ATX1 is a very druggable compound, as one says. It's a terrible word, but it is stable. It is orally available in all animals that we tested. It has been already in the bodies of people for 40 years as a metabolite of naltrexone, so it's really, really safe. And we can simply make any type of a tablet. It has a good half-life in the body, so you need to take it maybe once or twice a day at best. We can also make formulations that would be sustained release. Alternatives are still nasal preparation or all kinds of things that one can do with it, but it's so easy to do. It's a simple tablet that you take, and it will hang around at the receptor long enough to do the stuff we want without affecting analgesia.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that goes right into the follow-up question, which I think you addressed, but I'm going to give it its full glory here. If ATX01 is given orally, is the idea that it would be part of the mixed compound with the opioid and ATX1, or would it be given as a separate medication at the same time as the pain medication is taken? So maybe we could take just a second to dig deeper into that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's really a great question, and we address that. We can do both. Initially, we will give it separately because that will be easier to get it through the FDA. We can titrate that better. It would be given to people who absolutely want to get off or want to prevent opioid addiction beforehand. But then we would like to also combine it with all the opioids like oxycodone, which has such a bad name, or fentanyl, or morphine, a priori, and then in a combination product that requires further FDA approvals. But that's really our eventual goal, to just really have these opioid analgesic combined with 6-beta-naltrexone, preferably in a way that they cannot be easily separated, and therefore you cannot take them out.
And from a business perspective, I think the combination of co-formulation between ATX1 and an opioid actually creates a pretty special pain therapeutic, the one that might be labeled as a non-addictive pain therapeutic. And so I think the magic eventually is to co-formulate those and provide them together so that you can also prevent the patient from only taking the opioid and not ATX1. And so I think that's probably where a strategic pharmaceutical company would look at this with tremendous value.
Actually, I just would like to add that at slightly higher doses, ATX1 will also, in animal models, but also in humans, I'm pretty sure, will prevent the constipation and the effects of opioids on the peripheral system. There are many of opioid targets, receptor targets in the periphery, but constipation is one major problem. And I think with a slightly higher dose, when it doesn't get into the brain yet and doesn't affect analgesia, we can treat constipation, for example.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's more side effects to painkillers than purely the addictive properties. So that's fantastic.
Right.
One more question, then I'm gonna dig into some of the more scheduled programming here. Can you explain the concept of a retrograde addiction modulator? somebody's gone deep into the offering page. And I think that's a
Right.
Wolfgang question.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay. Well, this actually, John is the creator of this wonderful retrograde word. And that's basically because we're reversing the dependent state of the opioid receptor back to the silent state in the naive state. So he thought that would be more illustrative in terms of the mechanism of action, would grab people's attention. So that's where that word comes from.
Well, and I think it also speaks to the novel mechanism of action at low dose, because it kind of there's the spectrum of antagonist to agonist, and really it kind of resides in the middle. But rather than trying to call it a neutral agonist or really the what it does is it basically goes in, attaches to the mu opioid receptor, hangs onto it for longer. It's got a longer half-life than an opioid itself, and starts to revert the opioid receptor in the brain back to the opioid naive state. So you're basically taking a patient and getting them back to where they were before they became addicted.
And let me just add that because of the low potency of ATX as a antagonist, nobody has thought about giving doses that are 10 to 100 times below that and get potent effects on something that nobody has ever tested. So that's why this is novel.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I do want to circle back. I know there's some other members of the team we have to talk about, John Sachs and Bob Davis. But before we do that, more questions coming in from the community, and we're going to prioritize that all throughout this programming.
Great.
So
Yeah.
these animal study results are compelling. I'm not familiar with the FDA process. What are your concerns with replicating them in humans, and when would human trials occur? Great question. And I'm going to do one quick caveat, sorry, in that the future is inherently speculative and uncertain. So I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. This is probably things that we intend to do, we plan to do. I imagine the expectation is that we will reach these goals. So I'm going to put that little caveat out there. With that being said, ideally, when would these human trials occur?
So let me kind of tee that up a little bit, and then Wolfgang, you can supplement this. The progress that we've made over the past couple of years has been pretty astounding. With our current funding, from the NIH grants, and then also our paid-in capital, we've been able to complete all of the required studies to open up an IND with the FDA. And so that gets us to our next milestone, which is we're in the process of preparing a request for a pre-IND meeting with the FDA. It's kind of a typical part of a biotech startup. And once that happens, it's also a valuation inflection point. So we would anticipate by the end of this year, or early next year, to have a pre-IND meeting with the FDA. And then that would mean that we would be positioned to be in phase 1 clinical trials by mid-2025.
Yeah, and let me add to that. So the type of animal experiments that we have testing 6PN for reversing dependence or reducing hyperalgesia, which is very important in opioid pain therapy, because people get afraid of getting off because they are more sensitive to pain, as well as craving. These animal models have proven to be rather predictive for what one would see in humans. So mice, guinea pigs, and monkeys are all pretty similar in their response to opioids. It seems to be a general phenomenon in evolution. What we cannot say is that absolutely the same thing will actually occur in humans, but there are some indirect effects based on 6PN being a metabolite of naltrexone, which has been used for a long time. And if you dig into the literature very carefully, you can see signs that actually ATX1 will be effective in the way we see it in animal models. So that's a prediction. And of course, the biggest problem in clinical trials is toxicity, which I think is extremely minimal for our company at those extremely low doses. It's just not, it's very unlikely to happen. So that's the biggest obstacle. And then the question whether it acts exactly like in animal models, that can only be determined once you do the clinical trials, but I am pretty sure that there will be equivalent effects in humans.
And I'll just add too, Wolfgang, we have a number of species that we have done these preclinical models on. And so I think, the combination of those, we've got mice, rats, beagles, and also primates. For a company in the mode of where we are, we actually have a far more robust suite of preclinical data to support our novel mechanism of action. So we're very excited. There's always risk in biotech, and so I certainly couldn't guarantee anything. But in the spectrum of risk, it's a far lower risk, especially since, as Wolfgang noted, this is the main metabolite of a drug that's been on the market for decades.
And our mechanism has found some resonance with expert at the National Institute of Drug Abuse, who have granted us an ongoing trial in rhesus monkeys that have been trained to take heroin, and they take this to a certain level, and then we add our compound, and in a variable way, but in a very significant way, extremely low doses of ATX1 switched some of the monkeys completely off heroin to food pellets. So there is an indication that the compound will actually also reduce craving.
That's fantastic. So let's take a moment and do a deeper dive on that, if you don't mind, because that was exactly the next question. So can you expand on the recently released preliminary results on the rhesus monkey study? So part of it was an indication to potentially reduce craving, which is mind-blowing. But is there anything else you could share about that study that we could dig into there? And great questions from the community, by the way. This is I am here for this. Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a good question. We did not get the report yet. The lead person, Dr. Akri at NIDA, has emailed me several times now. She is really driving this process. These experiments are incredibly expensive and very slow. So we have also modified the protocol. Initially, there was finding that maybe at 1 to 10 micrograms per kilogram, so that would be 100 to 1,000 times below what's really would be an antagonist. Some monkeys stopped taking heroin and switched to food, but not all. So there's a big variability in there. We changed the protocol, and now we have 3 monkeys already, and according to her Dr. Akri's text, 2 completely switched to food pellets, again at 1 to 3 micrograms per kilogram. That's 0.001 milligrams per kilogram, whereas a 3rd monkey did not. And they're doing now a 4th monkey, and that the results will be outcoming. No matter what, there's variability that we don't understand. We have to look at are those females or males, or are they dominant animals, or this behavior is very difficult to interpret, but we do see some stunning effects.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for the question, and I appreciate you
good question.
That's really exciting. I had an opportunity to study at an international opportunity at the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and I think they'd be really interested in that study when it's available. That's out of the executive office in the White House, and I think everybody's trying to solve this problem. We appreciate this is a real deal, and it affects so many people, so many families have been harmed by the opioid epidemic.
Yeah, I mean, one of the consolations was that our compound might actually enhance the use of opioids, because now everybody just gets happy, and all of a sudden you have a real big problem at hand. So we need to address those issues, and the data point in the direction that this will be the opposite.
Right. Yeah. So we do have other animal models that indicate that there's no increase in intake of an opioid as a result of using this. So we feel like we've kind of covered our backside with that potential risk. But again, that's one of the benefits of Aether having such a broad array of preclinical data, and which is why we're so bullish on the relatively low risk.
And that study, were you talking about some of those were studies where the guinea pig data, right? Is that what you're referencing in that part
Those
there and
were
that
actually
increasing?
rat data.
Oh, that was the rat
Yeah,
data. Gotcha.
with oxycodone, where
But speaking of guinea pig, I love this, right? So part of the NIH funding that we had previously was a study on methadone-dependent pregnant guinea pigs, and what they found was is that when the pups were born, they were born without any withdrawal symptoms, and this is super compelling.
That is. No, thanks for that. The rat data was really impressive, but the guinea pig data about the methadone addicted pups, that is actually a piece that I wanted to dig into as well. The idea that folks that were, for whatever reason, drug addicted, giving birth, there was like this reconciliation, this kind of resolution, if you will, to the pups
Right.
and then the next generation there. And that's incredibly impactful. Okay, so I think that let's get back to some of the other folks. Like, we can't leave John Sachs on the sideline. We can't not mention Bob Davis. I don't think we can leave John McNew on the side. Rick Hawkins. Can we talk a little bit about the rest of the star-studded team that you've been able to build around the Ether Therapeutics team and what they bring to the table? I know we could go all night on that, but we have to at least give
Sure.
some credence to those folks, I think.
And that's another exciting element of the team, or of kind of what we have as a value proposition. Our team is really strong and has tremendous depth in biotech development. You had a chance to meet Wolfgang. You can kind of see that he's, as they say, has game in the opioid space, right? But Wolfgang didn't mention, but I will, that he's published over 400 papers and articles in his illustrious career, and he's one of the top 10 researchers, in the world in his area of expertise. And so it's great to have that there. But in addition to Wolfgang, Rick Hawkins is one of our founders. Now, Rick has a 40-year entrepreneurial biotech experience. He's had multiple successful exits. He is currently the chairman and CEO of Lumos Pharma, which is developing an oral a growth hormone treatment, which is pretty dang compelling. And then, as you mentioned, John Sachs is our chairman, and John's been around for many, many decades. Has been a executive with Roche. He's a patent attorney by trade, and which is really valuable to have as a part of our leadership team. He's currently the lead director of K2X, which is formerly known as Kaido Technologies. But he's just got a wealth of experience, and we leverage him on a regular basis. Bob Davis is a PharmD, so he's a pharmacist, doctor of pharmacy, and has probably, let's see, 38, close to 40 years worth of experience in drug development, getting products, from preclinical out the door. And then John McHugh is a technical advisor to us. John has been with the National Institute of Health. He led their translational science division there at the NIH, and he's a PhD. And then, of course, myself, I've been in the biotech life science space for the last 25 years. And so I think that the team itself is very strong, lots of capabilities, and I think we've got tremendous support behind us. I don't know, Wolfgang, is there anything else you want to add there?
No, no, I think it's a very strong team. It's very great to work with, and it's synergistic. So I think we are poised to really bringing this through.
Well, I don't want to leave Rick Hawkins hanging, but then I want to get over to the questions coming. But I know there's at least one more mention, at least for Rick. Can you give us a little bit of his background? And then I'm going to get back to these questions that are coming in, which is what we're here for. Thanks for asking these questions.
Yeah, so Rick early on started a CRO, one of the small CROs, and so a CRO is a clinical research organization that does clinical trials on behalf of sponsors like Ether or larger companies. And so Rick has built that business from the ground up and ended up selling it to again, these companies have all changed hands and names over a long period of time. But that was his first exit. And then he also was a pioneer in leveraging technology from universities. And so he was actually able to bring a technology that was at Ohio University. So we try not to say that too much. We don't want to offend Wolfgang, who was at Ohio State. But Rick was able to commercialize some technology from Ohio University that became the single largest royalty stream for Ohio University when that product ended up going onto the market. So, I mean, Rick's a legend in the marketplace, very well known, and we're fortunate to have him as one of our founding members.
We'll all do our best to forgive Rick for his misguided engagement with Ohio University. But let's get to the questions coming in, and we're going to circle back to a couple more of the standard questions as well. So, and again, this is a little bit of a broad one, and we, with some uncertainty in the future. But how much capital do you anticipate needing to initiate and then complete phase one clinical trial?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll tackle that head on. Our current net capital raise is targeting $800,000, and what that will enable us to do is to get to the point where we have an open IND with the FDA for a phase one clinical trial. And that also helps us to begin production of material that would be used on humans. The material that we have that's appropriate to use on animals obviously can't be used on humans, so we've got to create a lab grade product that would be used in the clinical trial. So that helps us to begin that. But to get through our phase one trial, we'll need to raise an additional $5.5 million. And this is typical. It's well within the range of what a typical phase one trial does. And then our planned phase two, which would take place once the phase one is complete, would require another probably $13-14 million to do a fulsome phase two clinical trial. That's our pathway. And in biotech, it's typical that the sweet spot for an exit with a strategic investor is post phase two. But there's an off chance that after phase one, we might get an exit, offer. And certainly there's going to be ample interest in this due to, the problem that I believe ATX1 solves.
Great question and a head-on answer there. Let's talk a little bit about the broader market here. So when we talk about kind of pain therapy and addiction cessation, how big is the market? And again, we have to talk about the business case. As uncomfortable as this is a therapeutic, but it is ultimately fundraising as a business. So can we talk about kind of the size of the market? We talked about the problem and its significance, but broadly in terms of dollars and cents, how large is the market of what Aether Therapeutics can target?
So we focus mostly on the U.S. market, and we estimate the total available market in the U.S. between the three indications is about $13 billion. And I took a different approach with each individual market modeling. So in the case of NOWs, right, what you're really doing is you're preventing the baby from going into the neonatal intensive care unit, and it's a rare and orphan disease, which, provided that the government continues their, orphan disease, pediatric orphan disease vouchers, would actually qualify for a pediatric voucher. So we took a, kind of a different model for scoping out the neonatal application for it. Then secondly is the OUD or opioid use disorder market. That is a cessation. So that would be treatment for patients who are going through a drug rehabilitation program. And so I took a different model with that because what you would, and one of the benefits of this is you can begin treatment with ATX1, in theory, we've still got to get through clinical trials, but once this gets out the door and into the marketplace, the moment a patient goes into a drug rehab program, you can begin to treat them with ATX1. And so imagine those 4 million patients that are going into a drug rehab program, rather than making them go stone cold sober for 2 weeks before you can begin a pharmaceutical, kind of treatment pathway with bupephrenone or methadone. You can begin to treat them immediately with ATX1, and it would be a brand new drug, premium price model. And then lastly, on the a co-formulation with an opioid, we looked at that model differently. They're all generic nowadays, and so if you could actually go into one of the pain manufacturers and then couple this together, you would have a branded and a label enhancement to a pain therapeutic that could be less or non-addictive pain therapy. And I think, the doctors that we've been in touch with would be delighted to be able to prescribe patients a drug for their pain that has much, less addictive qualities to it. And, so those are kind of the three areas where I think, our modeling is pretty solid. So, kind of backing up, we anticipate about a $1.7 billion market for nows, about a $5.5 billion market for OUD, and about a $5.5 billion market in the US only for pain. And then, but keep in mind that our IP portfolio has patent protection in the US, Europe, and then with our new patents, so we have a much broader coverage scope for our IP. So, the market US about $13 billion, but I would suspect we're going to be, more than double that when you take into account the worldwide needs.
Yeah, this is, I think we talk about the US market and it is large enough in itself, but this is not a uniquely American issue. And so I think it's a great, kind of tip of the spear application, but, this is something that we see kind of across the board as a human issue. I want to take a moment. We're getting towards the end of our programming here, and I'm happy to stick around if folks have a little bit longer because we had that false start with the recording. But I wanted to take a moment for the classic shameless plug. We have to have a reminder that we're actively raising capital.
Right.
Aether Therapeutics is actively raising capital on the Netcapital platform. I'm adding that link back into the chat feature there in Zoom. For those who are just calling in or watch the recording, you can go to netcapital.com and search Aether Therapeutics, or you can go to netcapital.com/companies /Ether Therapeutics. I always pronounce it as Aether because how I read it out. So I'm going to read out how you would look for it. If you go to Netcapital and search, you'll search AETHER Therapeutics. And that's where you'll be able to read the offering page, learn more. And if you are so inclined, you too can invest and own a piece of this company. So I wanted to add the link there again for those folks who are listening in. I think there's some fantastic questions here. I imagine some of you folks might have already participated with how thorough you've understood the investment opportunity. So I wanted to add the link in there again for folks to be able to click the link, search through Netcapital, or again, go directly to netcapital.com/companies/Ether Therapeutics, AETHER Therapeutics. And that's where you can learn more and invest. So we talked a little bit about the market size. You talked about the revenue model, which I think is quite straightforward, actually, because I think the model is actually basically getting through trials and your ability to be able to ultimately either go public, get acquired, or potentially license the technology to other folks. Do you want to add any more details about the revenue model before we talk about your IP and your defensibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly we are a pre-revenue company, and we don't anticipate any revenue to offset the spend that we would need to have to get the product developed to the point where it would be either, acquired outright by a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company, or we could go the IPO route. Phase 3 clinical trials typically run in the, $100 million and above range. And so, we would have to judge the IPO market at the time when we would be ready to do that. But I think, the likely scenario is that the technology would be acquired, or we would go to an IPO, and that would be the exit event. And, again, we anticipate that given our current timeline and development, that we anticipate that could be a 18 to 36-month time horizon, give or take a little.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. That's great. Kind of talks about kind of potential exit opportunities. And again, there's a lot of uncertainty with that. And you really do have to be thoughtful about timing with regards to exit opportunities. So that's super, super important. As a corporate attorney, I always love when we get to talk about this section. This is the defensibility part, and I love to talk about IP. Wolfgang's got a smirk on his face because he's excited about the intellectual property behind this company. Can we talk a little bit about some of your milestones and successes to date, not the least of which is your broad IP portfolio? Could we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So, fortunately, we've got the author of all of our IP here on the call in Wolfgang, but being a university professor, a portion of our IP, and it really surrounds the neonatal application, resides with the Ohio State Innovation Foundation. And so we have an exclusive license from OSIP, is what it's called. So we have a worldwide exclusive license from OSIP for the neonatal portion of it. But all of the other IP that we have, which includes co-formulation of ATX1 with an opioid, a weaning portfolio, and then also the low dosing portfolio is fully owned by Aether. And we have, U.S. and European, and then also with the newer patent applications that we have, those are all much more broad international in base.
Fantastic. And it's not just the IP in terms of successes today. We talked about being able to raise, over $6 million already in funding today, including quite a significant amount of National Institute of Health funding, which is always a really significant trigger, in my opinion. But you also talked about those toxicities and toxic kinetic studies that you've been able to have in animal studies. So I think that's fantastic. Let's talk about, you talked a little about the future as well in terms of the pre-IND and phase 1 anticipation. Can we talk a little bit about the kind of the existing market out there and how what you've been able to design and what you've been able to protect through IP? How do you differentiate yourself from kind of other companies in the space or what other folks are trying to do in this ecosystem?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We feel like we've got a very good IP position, right? And there's some competition out there. A lot of there's a few non-opioid pain therapeutics out there, and they're trying to solve the same thing. How do we treat patients with pain, without the addictive qualities to it? But really, the results have been mixed on the way that pain is treated. Number one, number two is that we kind of have a number of bites at the apple here. We're not only focused on pain, we're also focused on OUD cessation, and then we have the neonatal application. And so I think from a strategic perspective, we've got three discrete markets that we can deploy our technology to, and each and every one of them is attractive in their own right. Wolfgang, is there something you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, there are many new developments, non-opioid, but we have to realize that there are different qualities of pain, neuropathic pain and then back pain, and they're all responsive in a different way to medications. I think the conclusion right now is that opioids are still needed and absolutely needed, even though everybody wants to get away from opioids because of the really bad press it has been getting. But they can't. There are still tens of thousands of people on chronic opioid therapy for pain. That's therapy. Some of these get highly dependent. They are very difficult to get off, and there's really there's no substitute. So in the opioid field, there are many other companies who are trying to develop modified opioids or opioid combinations, and they're all partially successful, but the full-blown opioid effect is still the most effective analgesic. And we basically preserve that while we're taking the sting out of it. So I think that's really not nobody else has been capable of doing that to that extent.
Well, and I think that gets to the point that ATX1 represents a breakthrough. There have been some incremental improvements, but really, what our compound and the technology that we possess represents as a breakthrough in three discrete markets, which is really a fantastic opportunity. Risks, obviously, but again, as an opportunity to help advance a breakthrough technology is pretty special.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, as much as I think there's been a lot of criticism, rightfully so, on kind of all sorts of components of the infrastructure around opioids, but there's no denying kind of the important impact that they have on the medical community and how those in chronic and sustaining pain really do benefit from that opioid experience. And so we're really just trying to make sure that this is the best delivery and the most thoughtful way to keep them from experiencing those negative effects that come with this fantastic opportunity that is kind of avoiding pain. We did run a little bit over, and again, wanted to give some extra time, and I want to let some more people come in with their questions. We love those questions. Thank you so much for those. I'm gonna start doing a couple of our closing remarks and final questions. And so we've actually even talked about a little bit about what to expect in the future and exit strategies. So two of my favorite questions that I like to ask towards the end, one of which I'm going to start right now, outside of which probably the primary ask here, which would be go to Netcapital invest. But outside of cash, how can anybody listening to this webinar support the Ether Therapeutics team getting to the next level? Is there anything, doors that could be opened, relationships that could be built? How, obviously we're encouraging investment, but outside of cash, how can folks listening to this right now, how can they support your team?
So, it's interesting. We did a pretty thorough review of a lot of the potential ways that we can fund the company, and we chose Netcapital for a couple of reasons. One is we like you, Eric. So, you're a pretty cool guy, very impressive. But the other thing is that the ability for, a lot of people who've been touched by the opioid crisis feel helpless. What can I do? It's such a behemoth. And, amplifying and sharing our message on LinkedIn or the email blasts that we put out, sharing those with people that that might not have, $30,000 to chip in, but would more than willing to put in $500 to, help us with our cause. And that's why we chose Netcapital. Because I think that there is a really, kind of a latent group of people out there that would love to do something to, solve the opioid crisis. And we've got a potential solution, right here. And, so that's one of the ways that you can help is amplify our message online. Talk to your friends about a, really interesting approach to solving the opioid crisis, and throw them over to Netcapital. We doesn't matter if you invest, $99 or if you invest, $99,000. We view any sort of investment interest that we get as a validation of what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I'm not sending you the Venmo later. There's no twisting your arm on that. Although I obviously buy into that message wholeheartedly. I love the ability, and thank you so much for creating this opportunity for everyday folks who have been impacted by this to be able to participate in kind of changing the future that we live in. So I'm really grateful for both of you, not only what you're doing on the hard work on building the underlying technology, but on being thoughtful about letting people who are just everyday people impacted by this to be able to participate in the potential upside on that. And so amplify the message. Theoretically, you too can invest in, as John mentioned, as little as $99 through the platform. And then, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add to what folks could do there. And I always love closing on this one. Why is now the perfect time to go to netcapital.com and invest in Ether Therapeutics? You talked a little bit about that inflection point on phase one and phase two, and you start transitioning into that exit opportunity world. But why is now the perfect time to go to netcapital.com and invest directly in Ether Therapeutics?
Well, number one, we've built up tremendous momentum, and helping us to get to the point where we've got an open IND is critical. So timing is perfect, but as you kind of keyed in on, we're valued at about $17.5 million in this round. But the moment we have an open IND with the FDA, that valuation, and we've run the comps. I know you guys don't like us to talk about comps, but we've run the comps, and we know what the value of our company is with an open IND. We know what the value of our company is with a completed phase one. And so we believe this represents, a lot of people talk about impact investment, right? Because the cause of what we're trying to do really solves the societal ill. So you can feel great about investing in Ether Therapeutics just on the surface of solving the opioid crisis. But we believe it also represents a significant, potential financial upside for someone to invest today rather than wait it out, because it's going to get more expensive as we continue our development.
I love that so much. And I would let that be the ending closing market, but I want one last word from Wolfgang here. As the scientist with so many articles and so much experience in this space, thank you so much for the hard work you're doing here. Can you give us a closing remark on why you're so excited to be working with the team here and why you encourage folks to join you along this journey?
Yeah, I have to say that I'm very excited about what we're doing right now. I mean, I've been in research in a number of different areas, so I have good overview. And when this idea about this retrograde mechanism came about, which is really very unusual, I have to say that that's probably the best thing that I've ever done, or the most important thing I've ever done. So I'm therefore I'm sitting here and I'm going to see it through because that is potentially the most valuable thing in my career.
That is incredibly high praise coming from you with everything you've already accomplished. So I love that. I think that's the perfect place to end. I want to thank you guys so much, all the attendees with the fantastic questions. Very thoughtful, very deliberate. That's exactly what we're here for. So thank you so much for asking those questions. As John mentioned earlier, if you missed some of this or you think somebody might be interested in learning more about this, share about the investment opportunity. They too can go directly to netcapital.com/companies/ether therapeutics. That's AETHER therapeutics, and they can learn more about the investment opportunity, and they too can invest. I've added a link into that, and somebody did just ask. Absolutely, this has been recorded. It'll be shared broadly. I'm adding a link to our YouTube channel where it'll be uploaded right now. There it is in the chat. You can go to YouTube and search Net Capital, and this will be uploaded very shortly. So if you miss anything, or you are interested in learning more, or you think somebody might be interested in learning more, or you know someone who's been affected by this, there are folks that are working on this, and you too can have a tangible impact on what I view as an incredibly important societal harm. I know my family has been personally impacted by this. I imagine most families, actually, I think the data suggests most families know somebody who has been impacted by this. So I appreciate the thank yous coming in for the chat there. It is absolutely my pleasure. And I want to thank the two team members here, John and Wolfgang. Thank you again for two pieces, creating this underlying technology that I think is very promising, and being willing to let the everyday people come into the deal and join you for the ride on the potential upside. So thank you both for spending your time with
Thank
me this
you.
afternoon.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
We appreciate it too.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end there. Remember, the recording will be available soon, and you too can invest in Aether Therapeutics. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.